Open authorization, or OAuth, is one of the many authentication strategies supported by Passport.js and subsequently Feathers. Here we have an existing Feathers application to which we will implement OAuth using Google as a provider. Before we dive into the code, there's a few tokens we need to generate. Google provides documentation on setting up and registering OAuth applications through the Google Developer Console. Using this console, I've already set up a test project and will create the specific tokens we need for our application. Clicking Create Credentials gives us access to the various options Google provides. I'm going to select the OAuth client ID on this menu and Web Application for the application type. This exposes three fields we care about: name, origins, and redirect URIs. The name is arbitrary and can be any string. This is helpful for knowing what each client ID is used for in the Google Developer Console. Authorized JavaScript origins refers to where the Google service can expect requests to come from. In our case, we'll have a local server running on HTTP localhost port 9001. Authorized redirect URIs refers to the address Google should notify upon completion of the original request. The default Feathers authentication callback URL is /auth/provider/callback. As Google is our provider, this results in localhost port 9001 /auth/google/callback. With those three fields, I can click Create and we are presented with their new client ID and client secret for this application. Each of these tokens now needs to be copied into our local configuration. Please note, it is best practice to set these tokens as environment variables as opposed to storing them in your project's source code. I'm going to open up our default config file and create a new authentication section. The section names are arbitrary, they're only for organization within our configuration files. I'm also going to create a child section for our new tokens. This is for cleaner separation in the event you have multiple providers or strategies with their own set of tokens. Now that I've copied our client ID, I'm going to tab back to the Google Developer Console and copy our client secret. Once this is placed in our configuration, the only remaining token we need to generate is the secret we're going to use for generating new JWTs. The security of JWTs lies mainly in the relation between the size of a JWT body and its secret. The closer they are in size, the greater the risk of exposing the secret. For our example application, we'll use the built-in crypto library to generate a large string. The Node Crypto API gives us the random bytes method, which, when invoked, returns a buffer. I'm going to call toString on the buffer with a hex type to generate our token and copy this into our configuration. Now that we've generated all the necessary tokens, we can write the authentication service. I'm going to open up our services and authentication folders, and we can now add all the modules we'll need to complete the OAuth flow. The authentication module sets up the authentication service endpoint, while the JWT module handles creation and verification of JWTs. The OAuth and Passport modules handle the OAuth flow. Passport handles the communication between our application and the provider, while the OAuth plugin makes the corresponding service requests. We now need to load the tokens we generated and placed in our configurations earlier. The keys, secret, and Google correspond to the same keys of our configuration objects in default.json. The JWT secret we've generated is the only property we need to pass into the core authentication module. This is passed in with a parameter of the same name. We'll use the default JWT configuration as we're not doing anything custom here, and we'll set the necessary properties for the OAuth 2 plugin. Name is an arbitrary string identifier. We'll use Google as that is the provider we're using. We're also going to pass in the Passport strategy and the corresponding client ID and client secret from our configuration file. Scope refers to which permissions we need to request from our OAuth provider. For this example, we're only going to request the email scope. We can start the server as is. With the default endpoint of /auth/Google, we're redirected to Google's OAuth verification page, which is just the Google account page. I'm logged in with my default account. We're redirected back to the callback URL, which is /auth/google/callback, and Feathers JWT has generated a token for us, which is returned to the body of the authentication service. Although the OAuth flow is now complete, all of our existing services in this application are still exposed. If I were to make requests to the items or user service or even authentication service, I'm able to make requests, generate new tokens, and even insert or remove data. This is where hooks come into play. The core authentication module has an authenticate hook, which accepts an array of different strategies you can use before a request reaches its service endpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a hook in the before create, which is the post method for the authentication service, and I'm going to add the authenticate hook and pass in the JWT strategy. This is going to verify that any request coming in to post authentication has a valid JWT in the bearer token header. If we restart the server, now that we've added that hook, we can see making the same request to try and generate a token now returns a server error because there's no auth token present in our header. A pro tip, use the Feathers errors module. We're not using it in this project, but that will correctly map out HTTP status error codes. If we apply the same authenticate hook to the users and items service, we are now able to verify that only requests with valid JWTs access these services. In other words, you have to be logged in or authenticated through Google in this application to be able to create items or view items. What I'm going through now is just copying and pasting the same hook both to the items and users service. Restarting our service one last time, we are now able to verify that we no longer have access to the item service as we've properly implemented the authenticate JWT hook. By switching back to our browser, we can copy that JWT generated from the Google OAuth flow, and by placing it in the bearer authorization header, we can now successfully make requests to access and modify items data. I'm going to make a quick post request just to show that we do have access to all verbs of the service. Here we've posted a simple object, hello world, and I'm going to go ahead and try to fetch the same object from our service. This is just an in-memory service provided by Feathers, and we can see we do have access. If you were to make the same GET request to the user service, you would see all the data returned by the email scope provided by the Google OAuth service. I'm not going to do it in this example, as that would expose quite a few tokens and IDs on my personal account, but this is something you can try at home.